All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the fourth and final webinar for the systematic review series for the semester. Thank you all for attending and taking time out of your day. If you all have to leave early, you again will have access to the recordings and the PowerPoint slides going forward. And if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat, or you can, vocalize them. You can unmute yourself if you want to. I don't mind. I'm sporting a little bit of a migraine today and I have sleepy eyes. So I'm going to turn off my video today. And if you guys need anything or have any questions throughout this, again, feel free to chat it in, or you can email me or my colleagues, the other librarians as part of the systematic or in part of the systematic review service anytime. And we are here to help. So let's go ahead and get started. So this series is the webinars, Don't Be Spooked, Librarians to the Rescue, Preparing for Scoping and Systematic Reviews. And I was telling James, who's going to be managing the chat, I was questioning my life choices whenever I was grouping these two together. But then I was thinking, because the scoping and systematic reviews are very similar in their process, I think that it is okay to group them together. There's only a few changes here and there in comparison with scoping review to systematic review. So we'll talk briefly about what is a scoping review, what is a systematic review, and I'm going to share some guidelines and standards depending on your discipline or field of research that will help you navigate the steps of either of these review types. And there's templates, there's protocols, there's example reviews that you can use as well. Excuse me. So we will go over briefly the main steps to conducting these reviews, but really because I'm a librarian and my portion of the systematic review, scoping review, evidence synthesis process in general, we're really focused on the early stages of this project or these types of projects. I want to highlight the pre-planning stages, specifically, excuse me, guys, defining your review question, building your research teams, crafting your protocols or your plans of action, and show you different options of tools for screening and data management. And throughout this, how to minimize bias, which is the biggest, well, not the biggest, but one of the biggest issues of evidence synthesis and what you really want to control when you're doing these types of reviews. And then at the end, we'll conclude, and I'll talk a little bit about our systematic review service and some news with that at the very end. So what are scoping and systematic reviews? So these are both secondary sources, very rigorous, transparent reviews, very methodical, and they are similar. But here are the official definitions for them on the next couple slides. So I'm going to use and I say Joanna Briggs Institute, sorry, they've changed their name to JBI Global, but for the longest time I've known them as Joanna Briggs. Joanna Briggs, they have a really great resource for scoping reviews. And I think it's chapter 10 in their evidence synthesis manual. So I'm going to use their definition. But a scoping review is a type of evidence synthesis that aims to map the evidence on a topic, identify main concepts, theories, sources, and knowledge gaps. Scoping reviews are useful for examining emerging areas of research, clarifying key concepts or definitions in the literature, or identifying knowledge gaps. So there are several in JBI's framework for scoping reviews that includes the following steps below. So you're identifying the research question, just as you would with a systematic review. You're searching for all of the relevant studies. You're selecting studies based on eligibility criteria that you set ahead of time before screening the literature. Then you're charting data, and with the data, you're then summarizing findings, and you're not summarizing them in the same way that you would with a traditional systematic review. The synthesization is a little different. So with your scoping reviews, these are especially useful when you have a very broad research question. And I've talked about this, I think 3 weeks ago in the first webinar. But if you have a research question that's very broad, or if you have multiple types of questions that might make their way into your question, or if you have a topic that is more complex, these are also really great if you have a research area that hasn't been comprehensively reviewed before, then you might consider doing a scoping review. Now, a systematic review, the definition that I've chosen is the Cochrane collaboration because they're kind of the OG of systematic reviews and that manual and guidelines. Cochrane collaboration, if you're familiar with it, they are really focused towards your medical intervention-based systematic reviews. So they are very restrictive in what they do and what they can advise on. But for the most part, across disciplines, this is very much the same. A systematic review is a review of a clearly formulated question that uses systematic and explicit methods to identify, select, critically appraise, and collect and analyze data from the studies that are included. So some key characteristics of a systematic review that is a little different from scoping review is the systematic review process is much more structured. It is stricter with the inclusion and exclusion criteria as far as framing it and determining it before screening. It also is very imperative with systematic reviews that you are using as much of a transparent approach as possible on following the steps, but also reporting what you are doing to minimize bias. So you have a very clearly defined research question, and you have to you have to have a methodology that is reproducible. So that means report, report, report. The scoping reviews, the systematic reviews are different from scoping reviews because the goal of a systematic review is having a reliable synthesis of evidence to inform decision-making, especially in the fields of healthcare, education, and social sciences. So if your goal isn't to inform a change at the highest level, then you might not want to do a systematic review. Now, real quick, and the synthesis is different too with the systematic reviews and scoping reviews. So I did quickly want to mention that. So when we're synthesizing the evidence between these reviews, it's not really just summarizing the information. So when you get to that stage, synthesizing in the context of your your research reviews, you're combining your findings of the included studies because you're wanting to create a comprehensive or cohesive understanding of your research topic. And instead of just summarizing your studies, and especially with your scoping reviews too, you're identifying patterns, relationships, differences, or commonalities across your evidence, and you're wanting to generate new insights or a focus for practice. So with scoping reviews, the synthesizing it does involve more summarizing, but you're summarizing the scope of evidence and not using a deep integration like you would with your systematic reviews, but you are focusing on mapping the breadth of the research field instead of like a systematic review. You're not trying to provide a single synthesized outcome. With systematic reviews, there are two main types of synthesization, is that a word? Synthesizing of the evidence. You have the quantitative synthesis. With systematic reviews, this is going to be your meta-analysis. So when your studies are homogeneous enough, you're able to provide, and they have numerical data, that's when a statistician comes in and they're combining the results of those individual studies and they're calculating them and an overall effect or average so that you have pretty much one precise measurement or outcome. When you're working with qualitative systematic review, or not necessarily just qualitative systematic reviews, but when you're working with studies, your final included studies that might not be as homogeneous, you're going to have more narrative or diverse methodologies with different study designs that might not all be randomized control trials, for example. So your qualitative synthesis, you're identifying themes, concepts, your trends across the research field, and different techniques are available. So you might have a thematic synthesis, a narrative synthesis, framework synthesis, and you're really trying to interpret the results in a meaningful way instead of having one sole answer. So let's get into the standards and guidelines. A few weeks ago, I think it was Dr. Donaldson, he had asked about, his area is not strictly on medicine, and many of our researchers aren't just in the fields of medicine. And while Lister Hill is focused on health sciences, and we have the 7 schools in medicine, public health, nursing, et cetera, There are other systematic reviews that are conducted that are still very important to their disciplines. So you have agriculture guidelines, you have engineering, oh gosh, I just blanked, education. So there are a lot of other options and organizations that have developed standards so that you can still follow that rigorous systematic review process for publication. So we'll take a look at a couple of these. The ones on this slide are probably the most recognizable. So you have the Campbell collaboration. I have the funder sponsor information as well. Oh, and actually, maybe I shouldn't do this right now, but I'm going to show my video real quick. I don't know if you can see me, but these two books here, Piecing Together the Systematic Review and Other Evidence Synthesis, the two librarians wrote this book, Margaret Foster and Sarah Jewell. And then also this book, Doing a Systematic Review, a Student's Guide. Oh gosh, it's hard to see. But these books we have in the reference department, it's our collection, but oh, I think it's backwards. Am I backwards? Anyway, those are some good manuals that you can use as well to kind of find all of these standards and guidelines as well, and everything else that I'm talking about today. Share my screen again. Forgot what the point of that was actually. Oh, but anyway, Margaret Foster and Sarah Jewell's book, Piecing Together the Systematic Reviews, this is where this is coming from. So they investigated a lot of other collaborations and organizations. So Campbell collaboration, this is going to be not necessarily interdisciplinary, but those social sciences systematic reviews. You might use the Campbell collaboration manual. They have topics for criminal justice, education, social welfare, and some on environmental engineering when it is related to social sciences or urban planning infrastructure. Then you have your Cochrane collaboration, which is your effectiveness medical medical systematic reviews. But then you have others. So you have the collaboration for environmental evidence. This is going to have more of your environmental engineering, policy and practice. JBI Global. This is a really great resource and includes templates for a variety of different review types. So you have your umbrella reviews, scoping reviews, and the different types of systematic reviews as well. So while you might want to focus on and stick with a specific organization to help you with your progress or your process or your systematic review, there are other options. So for instance, if you don't have access or if you can't find a manual in your field, you can always ask us. But what I would also suggest, if there's not one available, Prisma for scoping reviews and the Prisma for systematic reviews and meta-analyses, these are really good reporting guidelines, or not guidelines, they're, well, are they standards? But they're giving guidance on how to report, what to report to be as transparent as possible. Do you have questions about any of that? Okay. So as far as the main steps to conducting these reviews, you want to follow the steps and the reporting guidelines to ensure success. But for the most part, this was taken from that second book that I showed you, Doing a Systematic Review Student's Guide, but they've kind of blocked it off or charted it in a helpful roadmap of 10 major steps. I would probably have grouped two of them together and done maybe 9 or maybe 8. But the first step and the second step is what I'm going to focus on a little bit more today. But the step 1, you're planning your review. This is where, and this is kind of grouped with 2, you can kind of get an idea of what are you interested in, what's your research area. You can do some scoping searches. This goes into step 2, preliminary searches in the databases, and look at other registries that have protocols to see what is being published in your area or your research interest. By doing some of these early searches, you can see what's already been published, so you don't have to duplicate efforts. And this will also help you see what types of reviews or study designs you might want to work with, depending on your question. this is step 2. You're going to want to frame your research question. So you want to have a strict, concise question before you do any of the searches. Otherwise, it's a lot of research waste up front, and it can really dissuade you from wanting to continue if you don't do these properly in a fleshed out way. You also want to be drafting your protocol at the very beginning. We'll talk more about that later. Step 3 is literature searching. This is really where the librarians are the most involved, and this is really what we do, especially for authorship. But once we compile all of the evidence on a topic, and this is also important for scoping reviews and systematic reviews, you're not able to cherry pick the literature. It's very resource heavy, resource intensive. So with scoping and systematic reviews, it's important to not only do thorough, comprehensive, transparent searches in databases in your discipline, but you also really, really need to be looking through gray literature. I know that you don't want to, I know that it's a lot, but you should, because there are all kinds of different data that you might not see, that might not be formally available in the databases that could still be useful for answering your research questions. So gray literature, contacting authors for their data, doing the database searching, those are all still really important things that you don't want to skimp on. And you don't select. So with the literature searches, you don't get to choose, like you would with a typical literature review, what studies are going to make it necessarily. Like you have a list of relevant citations that should be tested against the search so that they're included, but you're also going to have to screen tons of other resources as well. And it's not something that we can control. So you don't want to try and say, I only want to search 500 articles for my systematic review. You're already introducing bias. Step 4, once you have the evidence, usually you'll have some type of data software where the articles are uploaded. We use Covidence, but depending on the organization and the standards that I talked about earlier, like Campbell Collaboration, Cochrane, they have other data management tools that they want you to use, but it's not necessarily required. So Campbell Collaboration, or sorry, JBI I meant earlier. Campbell Collaboration, I think it's RevMan, and I think that's maybe for Cochrane as well. That's similar to Covidence. They just like you to hash out your data extraction in these tools. It's not required, but that's something that they like to support. JBI, you'll see JBI Sumari as a data extraction tool that they like to promote and utilize. But basically, we use Covidence, which is a really great platform to do all of the screening and data extraction and quality assessment. So steps 4 through 8. So anyway, once you do the title abstract screening, you're eliminating probably 90% of the articles just by a quick, hey, what is out there? Are we at least seeing everything out there, most likely on this topic, so that we're not missing anything major? And you're really basing this on your eligibility criteria, which should be set ahead of time. Step 5 and 6 is the full text screening. So often the librarians will help obtain the full text. We will usually ask for help from a team member. Graduate students can be really helpful here. Sometimes there are so many resources to upload full text that even after we do bulk upload, we still have to request things through interlibrary loan. So this is helpful for graduate students to also help us with. Once you have based your eligibility criteria in a more detailed way at the full text stage, that's when your data extraction and quality assessment comes into play. So you have your final included studies that match your eligibility criteria set at the very beginning of your project and based on your research question. And then you are going to comb through in the data extraction stage, you're going to decide what is the most important information. You're collecting specific information about each article that you will then synthesize later. After the data extraction for systematic reviews only, you need to do, and it's required, you have to do a quality assessment of those included studies. For systematic reviews, it's a risk of bias tool. For scoping reviews, you don't have to do this step. I do see a lot of teams, and it is great to do this too. If they want to, they could also do a critical appraisal or applicability of studies to fit their population or setting, and that is totally fine as well. It can make for a stronger review. Once you do the quality assessment stage, then you're basically taking everything from the data extraction table and everything that you've combed through and collected for that information of each of the studies. You're then basically synthesizing the included studies for your paper. And then step 10 is you're writing your manuscript and trying to get it published. So you don't want to take on a systematic review or scoping reviews lightly. They are a lot of work, and that's why they can take so long. But you don't want to miss out on these steps. So by pre-planning ahead of time, this is going to set you up for success, and it's so important. So we're going to talk about a little bit of the pre-planning stage. So as far as this goes, we're going to talk a little bit about defining your review question, which is the most important part of any systematic review or scoping review. Next, how to determine who should be on your research team. So teamwork makes the dream work, right? So there are a lot of different roles that you might need for your research team members. So I'm going to talk about that. Then we are going to talk about the protocol or your plan of action, and we'll get into the data management and the risk of bias or the minimizing bias for your review. So before we get into this, do you have any questions yet? All right, so let's get into defining your research question. So everything is based on a good question. So everything you do starts with that research question. What do you want to know? It's a good idea to, and this is the conceptualization of your project. So by having your research question, you want to make sure that you carefully construct it and that it is clear and specific. And there are a lot of frameworks that can help you do this. So when we first meet with the research team, the librarians, oftentimes, while the researchers, they are the subject experts, they're the gurus on the literature, or not the literature necessarily, but the clinical aspect of the topic. This can be a really difficult step to do, and often researchers can struggle with this first step. It's challenging to phrase your question, and you want to be able to phrase your question in a way that it's useful for the research, and in a way that the librarian can then take your question and search the literature. So I'm going to show you a couple frameworks that a team can use to help refine their topics or strategies to suit their particular research situation. But I do, so let me actually go over here real quick. So here is this is from the book I showed you earlier, by the librarians, Margaret Foster. Gosh, I just blanked out on what that was called. The Piecing Together the Systematic Reviews and Evidence Synthesis. And it's not about necessarily framing your question to fit a framework. It's opposite. You want to be sure that you are testing out these different questions and working out, because the frameworks really help you work out what you want to know and different possibilities on how to frame your question to find out. So they're going to ensure that your question is scoped appropriately, that your question is well defined, and that it's fitting the appropriate objective. So this is also the beginning stages for setting up your eligibility criteria. So sometimes your question, once you ask it, there's still a lot of information that you need to flush out and specify, and that you can do in the inclusion and exclusion criteria of your protocol. So I encourage you to just play around with some of these different frameworks, take your question or your research interest and try and see which fits the best. And I would say just take your time and practice with them. The core framework that health sciences use and learn about the most is PICO. So PICO stands for what is your patient population or population of your question. And sometimes, especially if you're maybe looking at a qualitative study or SPICE, for instance, if you don't have a specific patient population, you can use a different framework. But the PICO question is really fit for those medical questions. So what is your intervention of interest? This could be a drug that you're testing on a specific patient population, a comparison intervention, if there is one. There isn't always one. And then outcome. So one thing also to note, when you develop your question, just because you have your set question here, there are certain things that as the searcher, we cannot include in the search strategy. So for instance, if you're looking at an intervention in a specific patient population, you're wanting to see what happens. We don't search outcomes. And for systematic reviews, probably in 98% of cases, we don't search outcomes because then you're biasing the search to only look at specific outcomes that you list in the search strategies. So systematic reviews and scoping reviews, they're going to be the searches are going to be based on being sensitive. I think it was at a webinar in Medical Library Association one year, in a research or in a searching course. And James, I don't know if you heard this before, but they said that a good indicator of a sensitive search is having 2 relevant articles based on your inclusion criteria for every 100 results. So that just kind of shows you how crazy sensitive systematic review searches should be. And I don't know if that's always the case with all of the searches that we do, but I was like, oh my God. And I think this is also true when you're also including gray literature as well. So that can be something to just consider there. Okay. So as far as building your research team, this is really important to do at the very beginning. Now, I have a lot of teams that might change this up through the duration of the process, and sometimes that's inevitable, especially if you have graduate students on board, or if you have faculty from other institutions, things happen, things come up. But you want to be sure that you have a large enough team to kind of balance this, like fallout of participants, which does happen. We see it all the time. But having a team developed at the very beginning has a lot of benefits. So you have a variety of skills and expertise and people who can help you frame your research question, especially those content experts. And just as a note, it is okay for team members to take on more than one role that I cover in the next 2 slides. For systematic reviews, I have seen the literature say you have to have a minimum of 2 team members. I would say a minimum of 3, and this is just for the screening. And you have to have more than one person do a systematic review because you have to minimize the possibility of bias in the review. So here are some of the roles that you will see for systematic reviews, and I also mean this for scoping reviews. However, you won't have a statistician for a scoping review. You might not have a methodologist necessarily. But just take this kind of with a grain of salt, but the more the merrier, although you don't want to have too big of a team where you have to manage people rather than studies. So I would say for sure you have to have one content expert. I would say that I've seen teams that have 2 or more, and that really makes for a more successful review. Now, the content experts, they are often the PIs, and they are the ones who have significant knowledge on the question, and they're usually the ones that initiate the project and are helping develop the specific question and eligibility for the studies. So, let's see. Define topic involved. Oh yeah. So these people are involved in the entire process in most cases. And it's good to have 2, because often if you have more than one, it's easier to field screening and extraction questions from other team members. Next is the methodologist. So this is the research design expert. They need to have, you always, for a systematic review, you really, please, please, please have somebody other than the librarian that has experience doing systematic reviews. We cannot field questions for every single thing that happens because we're not the experts in every aspect of the systematic review process. So we can't field questions on statistics. That's not our area. But it just as an example, but have a methodologist on board that knows the systematic review process and can guide the teams to make sure that they're following standards. And also methodologists can be really beneficial at the inclusion, appraisal, and extraction stages, screening, appraisal, extraction stages, especially if they're really familiar with the research study designs that you are analyzing. So then the methodologist can also have a better understanding of a good methodology. And if a study seems to have a lot of bias, they're able to kind of field those easier. Next up, you need to have a librarian or a search expert at some part of the process for scoping reviews. Side note on that, because we have been getting so many requests with our service, we don't want students who are taking on scoping reviews to not be able to get their project done in a timely manner. So I have one of my colleagues who has been helping field research requests from graduate students who are doing scoping reviews that are happy to take on the search so that we can, so there's still a librarian in the process of helping students develop the searches and peer reviewing them. And I got distracted by saying that. But for systematic reviews, librarians need to be doing the search. It takes a lot more work trying to teach students how to do a search or faculty how to do the search. And the librarians, the systematic review and the quality of a systematic review is based on a good search. So if you don't have a good search, you don't have a good systematic review. So the librarians, we have training on all of these different databases, syntax, field codes, controlled vocabulary, keyword searching. We can work with many different databases. We can help with some gray literature searching, but we're also the ones who are responsible for not only the searches and the database translations, but we do have a lot of experience with data management, file formats, the software and tools that you can use for screening. And also we can guide you to the appropriate systematic review standards as well. Next up is a statistician, and I am so glad I'm not a statistician. This sounds like painful, but you have to have a statistician if you are doing a meta-analysis after your systematic review. These guys are the ones that perform the statistical measures and tests for heterogeneity. They look at testing for bias, and they're the ones who are presenting the graphs in those forest plots or other data visualization tools. They are making those final mathematical calculations on specialized software that the librarians do not know how to use. So you have to have a stats person. And often I think the schools each have a statistician. I'm not sure, but public health has a lot of statisticians, so you might reach out to them. Next, somebody who has data management experience. So this can be the librarian, but you can also have somebody else as well. But basically, this person is managing the flow of data through the entire process. Data is initially the citations, but later on, it's going to be data management of the process, so screening the studies and analyzing the results. So you do want to have familiarity with other programs and software as well. Last two, the project manager and consumers and stakeholders. So your project manager, it's usually not going to be the PI, but having a project manager is so good to have. And the ones that have a project manager are usually really successful with getting published. So the librarians are not your project manager, and often they're not necessarily the methodologists or the content experts, but this person is really important because they are overseeing the flow of the project. They are facilitating communication between the team members. They're making sure that everything is getting done on time. They can facilitate the meetings, and they also can be a really good point of contact for the the librarians, especially if the PIs cannot always meet with us. Sorry, taking a drink of water. Okay, next up you have consumers and stakeholders, which you don't always have stakeholders as part of the review process, but many organizations, they value having stakeholders to push a systematic review project to being published. They might have a say in the types of questions that should be asked for a systematic review. They have perspectives. And often if you have a consumer or stakeholder or an organization that is backing a systematic review, there is more of a sense of urgency and often success in getting something published. Especially if your stakeholders are patients, and especially if your systematic review is medically focused. They can be kind of key players on getting the research through. All right, I have questions so far. Any questions? All right. So let's move on to how would you go about finding methodologies? So Carrie, that's a good question. Often the schools will have and they might not be named officially the methodologist. It could be that they have a lot of training. So qualitative research, for instance, qualitative research is, there's a lot of training that needs to go into qualitative studies, because that can be a really tricky area. So in the School of Nursing, for instance, you will have people that have extensive training in different study designs, and you will probably find these people because they publish a lot on certain areas. Oh, gray literature. Yeah, so gray literature, I didn't really get involved with as much, but the gray literature is basically things that are not, you have research that might not be published and accessible as easily and readily in the databases. So they don't usually go through a formalized publishing process. So think meeting abstracts, conference proposals, poster presentations. Those can be really helpful, especially if there is background data that the authors have access to. A lot of times teams want to just remove abstracts because, especially in base, if you do a search and you have a lot of gray literature, like hundreds of records, they don't want to go through any of those. But often there's a lot of really beneficial information and new research that might be done. So gray literature can be really helpful here. So the librarians, we don't really search the gray literature anymore because that can be it's so time consuming and so vast. But we still will include for systematic review searches databases that have gray literature already indexed. So your conferences, editorials, sometimes legal cases. Let's see. But, oh, I'm trying to think. Yeah, but pretty much most of what thesis and dissertation, sorry, that's what I was trying to think of. So you'll have databases that do overlap and will have that content, but also consider your areas of expertise and your organizations that you're a part of. So with libraries, we are part of Medical Library Association, so we attend conferences that have a lot of presentations on different areas of librarianship that might not be available readily in the databases, but we still are contacting these experts because we need information from them that might help our own project. Does that help? But often we'll have, because you guys have access to certain organizations that we don't, we also encourage the researchers to look through Graylit as well. Okay. Oh, did I? Oh, okay. So now up is the protocol or plan. So this is something that nobody wants to do. It takes a lot of work, but your protocol is your best project management tool for your team. So with your project management tools, your protocol, it is the rule book for your entire systematic review process. It is what you should be referring to when you have conflicts arise or if you have issues. And it also will give you information. Oh, thank you. James just put something in the chat about gray literature in the health sciences. But basically with the protocol, you are forced to be transparent in what you're going to do, how you are going to gather your evidence, synthesize it, screen it, why you are doing your research, why are you doing the systematic review research in the first place, and who on your team is going to do each step of the project. So well-prepared teams do protocols, and they should be well constructed and detailed. And oftentimes when the librarians see teams that don't have a protocol, they don't publish. And that's often the case. If they can't do a protocol, if they don't want to take the work at the beginning to do the protocol and make sure that everybody's on the same page of the project, that's where things start to fall through, because then nobody knows what they're supposed to be doing and nobody is clear on what is the eligibility criteria and what is the question purpose. You have the option to register a protocol. With our systematic review service, I don't require this. I just want the teams to have a protocol that shows that they have considered their question, they know what they're planning on extracting, and they know what tools that they're going to use during the process. So you can register a protocol, and doing this has several benefits, but it makes you accountable more so when you have the protocol made publicly available in something like OSF, which is Open Science Framework, Prospero. There are dozens of other registries that you can register your protocol on. But they stake your claim on a project. So they prevent research duplication and research waste, because other researchers and librarians will see. So if somebody comes in, they're like, I want to do a review on this topic. You and the librarians, we can go in and see if there's already a protocol out there on that topic, so that you're not going to be duplicating efforts. And it's also a good way to kind of promote, hey, we're planning on doing this project, and generate more interest. So stakeholders could also get involved that way. So like you have templates for conducting systematic reviews, there's also plenty of protocol reporting guidelines. So you have the BME, I can't remember what this is, like best evidence medical education collaboration, something like that. Campbell Collaboration has templates for protocols. Equator, JBI has a template on how to report your protocol, what to report in your protocol, how to word it. OSF Science Framework has some different templates. Prisma P and Prospero. So I think actually the three that we see the most are going to be JBI, Prisma P, and Prospero. Let me just go into Prisma P. Okay. Okay, so here, Prisma and all of these reporting guidelines, they're checklists. So what they are trying to do is facilitate and making sure that you are reporting everything that's needed for a good protocol, and that you're able to then follow it. Always look at the explanation and elaboration papers for these checklists, because they will give you examples on how to word information in your protocol. Let me click on this DOI, and while that's loading, I'm also going to show you the checklist here. It's opening different screens. Can y'all see that? So this is Prisma P, the reporting items for systematic reviews protocols. It's from the 2015 checklist. But anyway, this is the section. This is the admin information. So your title, author information, contact, any sponsors that are involved. And you usually, based on the protocol, you want to try and document these in this order as well, so that it flows nicely. So sorry, my throat is like all dry. Then you have the rationale for your project, objectives. So you have your PICO question, and then let me zoom out a little bit. I'm sorry, guys. And then you have the method section. So what is your eligibility criteria? What framework are you using? What is your setting or population of interest? Now the search strategy, this is where the librarians can help out. So usually we'll have a search strategy, like a preliminary search drafted, or maybe we'll have a completed search in one database, and then we can always link to it for your protocol. And often what peer reviewers or journals will look for is a protocol link. So they like to go and be able to see that before you even did the systematic review, you had a protocol that you were following, and it makes it stronger. Let's see, I'm going to X out this one. And here, the BMJ, this one is really helpful. Let me open up this PDF. But it's an article, but it just says, okay, so let me scroll down, find examples. So section 1, this is explaining what needs to be included in the admin information, having a clear title, and then it gives you an example of each of these steps. So item 2, if registered, here is how you would report where it was registered and giving the registry number. It's just things that you wouldn't think of, and it helps mentally to save you a lot of work on how to format author affiliations, for example. And it gives an explanation. So I would always use this anytime you're doing a systematic review. Pick your manual and then keep that manual by you when you're working through your systematic review. Let's see, Jonathan, I'm reading your question. Is there any rationale of running a search in all article fields, perhaps just objectively searching within title abstract? Okay. Yeah, do we need maintain uniform article Search fields. Okay, so that's a really good question. So skimming through this, all fields. So you're asking about field tags, I'm guessing, trying to figure out between a text word search, like text word or text fields versus title abstract for keywords. It really depends. The librarians, we tend to play around with these. Oftentimes we'll use title abstract, but depending on the database, I think it's Ovid, title abstract is actually the same as TW. So sorry, it's so hard to explain this whenever I'm not like showing you a search example. Oftentimes we'll just use the TIAB, but if I'm not getting a lot of literature, I will expand it to keywords. And for a systematic review, more and more, I have started to just do title abstract keywords to find author keywords. It really just depends on the individual databases and how they index keywords and where they're showing up in the abstracts. Yes, you should always use controlled vocabulary for a systematic review search. A combination of your controlled vocabulary and your keyword searches is so important. Whenever you're communicating, and I say this with my undergraduate students whenever I was the nursing liaison, whenever you use mesh terms or controlled vocabulary in your searches, you're communicating with the database and you're making sure that you are using the language that they are using to index their articles. So if you have articles that are using a specific mesh heading or tree heading, CINAHL heading, by searching that, you're going to find those relevant articles that are indexed with those. Now, you also want to use keywords because not every article citation has yet been indexed with the controlled vocabulary. So you're kind of doubling down and making sure that you're being sensitive enough with your searches so that your keywords are also being searched in the title and the abstract fields. I feel like I'm not explaining that well at all. I'm so sorry. James, did I miss anything or did that even make sense? If you want to help me out there or elaborate.
I apologize. Which question was that?
Jonathan had a question on basically using text words, trying to determine text word versus title abstract, and
Oh
also
boy.
the benefits of using mesh. And it's such a long conversation, and
Yeah, that honestly, that could be a session in and of itself. I mean,
yeah,
um,
it's a good question.
it is a very good question. I I I don't think a review would be rejected for using like title abstract over text words. Um, but we tend to use title abstract here, uh, for whatever reason. Um, In some cases, maybe just title, although I think that's often overly restrictive, except in some edge cases.
Mhm.
Um, and with Mesh, depending on if you're searching in PubMed, to be comprehensive, you always want to include the relevant subject headings for your concepts. Um, but you know, the and or whatever subject terms are going to be relevant for the particular database you're searching in. Like in CINAHL, it would be the CINAHL subject headings. But just for the sake of comprehensiveness, and because of how subject headings are assigned, sometimes concepts can turn up in an article where that term won't be in the title or abstract. You definitely want to include both the subject terms and keywords. You probably already said that though, Becca.
And another thing too is not all databases have specified controlled vocab. So Scopus and Web of Science are major biomedical, and interdisciplinary. Well, Scopus is multidisciplinary, but your science databases, those are keyword searches only. So in that case, you don't need to search. And it's not about making each database search, and that's what I was going to say, exact. You can't, you have to balance using a combination of your specific terms, but also combine that with what is going to pull up the best results in this particular database. And sometimes that is involved with being more restrictive. Sometimes you have to be more open. It really just depends. And we honestly, every search that we do, we just have to play around with and we knot out things and we manipulate it in a way and we try and figure out what is bringing in the best results and what is the most sensitive. So, but that's, this is just an example that I have here on, I think this was a systematic review search, on bone fractures. But I had used, and this is from a long time ago, but I had used a combination of like mesh headings and title abstract. And one thing that librarians talk about a lot at meetings is, like sometimes we'll worry about a search in the middle of the night. We're like, or taking a shower, we're like, why didn't I do that term? I forgot about this keyword, and it'll bother us because we're crazy. And sometimes we'll have a publication and we're like, I wish I would have done that search a little differently, because there are 1,000 different ways that you can do a search. And it's really just based on being intuitive and understanding the databases and just trying to do the best you can. But no review is going to be perfect. No search is going to be absolutely perfect. So that's why even if you do a good search, you're probably going to miss something. So by having several different ways of searching the literature, whether that's hand searching, doing citation chasing of included studies after the search, those are also so important. I feel like we went on about that quite a bit, but that's kind of what we do all the time. So, but good question. All right, so let's go on to the screening and data management tools. I just wanted to include a slide of some of the tools that are available for systematic reviews, whether it's the study screening portion or the data extraction. There are a lot of free versions. I just wanted to make sure I had this screenshot from my textbook so that you could see it and refer back to it. But at UAB, you all will use Covidence. And you don't have to, but this is really what most of our teams use as Covidence, because it allows you to screen the literature at the title, abstract, full text stages. You're able to do your data extraction and your quality assessment all in one place. And then you can extract export everything to start working on your manuscript. Now, if you're not part of UAB in the future, there are still free tools that you can access. Now, they all have limitations. So some will just do title abstract screening, others will do title abstract full text, and then you might have to do data extraction outside of the interface. But these are all just options for you that you can check out. So I have Abstractor is a popular one for screening, just the title abstract. You also have Ryan, which is this is this is a Saudi Arabian company, I believe. But this is another interface that does title abstract and full text screening. It is not as robust, but it is still a really helpful tool, especially if you don't have access to something like Covenants. Okay, very quick on minimizing bias. So these are just some quick ways that you can minimize bias in your systematic review. So you obviously want to develop a clear protocol. So you're outlining your objectives, you're setting your inclusion, exclusion, and your methods before you're starting out to make sure that you're being consistent and you're transparent. So this is going to help you eliminate any bias and transparency. Same with those comprehensive searches. So getting a librarian to do your searches is going to be really helpful here. You can't cherry pick the literature. You can't control necessarily everything that's going to be included for you to screen, but this is going to help you prevent publication bias. And even with the searches themselves, there are things that we try not to do. So we don't search outcomes, but there are also specific hedges that we can use for study designs, and we try not to filter out very much in searches, because when we do, those filters are really focused on specificity, where systematic reviews are all about sensitivity. We want to make sure that we're not missing anything. So while you'll find irrelevant content, we're hoping that it's going to eliminate missing anything that you need to see. So instead of doing like a human filter search, we would do a special search hedge per database, and it would look something like an Embase. It would, instead of just using human filter, you'll often see the librarians building out a search query that is not, and you'll have parentheses, animal explode or non-human explode, close parentheses, not human explode. And it's just a specific, more sensitive way of finding human studies that might also have animal studies in the results, that you're at least not missing human studies. So it can be a real pain in the tush, but it is just things to be aware of. We also don't want you to not out non-English publications. That's a language bias. I didn't mention this here. Most all of the results that you're going to see in the databases have the abstracts and titles in English. So you're still able to do that title abstract screening to minimize bias, and most often those are going to be eliminated at this stage anyway, but you're minimizing bias, language bias, doing that. What's next? Okay, defining your eligibility criteria. This is going to help you be more consistent and avoid selection bias and ensure your reproducibility. Okay, so you're also conducting independent screening during the screening and data extraction process by having at least 2 reviewers. This is going to reduce bias and error, and it's also going to improve blinding of the studies. Assessing quality or study quality. By doing this, you're going to use maybe standardized tools to evaluate risk of bias of included studies for systematic review specifically. Next, anytime you are doing your systematic reviews, you want to make sure that you're documenting everything. So document and justify all of your decisions, and this is going to be very transparent, which is important. See if I'm missing anything. Oh, actually, let me show you real quick. So I have an example of a search that I already showed you, but let me see. So librarians, whenever we're documenting our searches, we're following Prisma S, and zoom in a little bit, but it's 16 item checklist. Yeah, 16. And it's just telling, this is our rules. Like this is what we write up in the method section for the searches. This is how we've done the searches. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on that one, but as far as being transparent and reproducible with the search, I have my teams follow this that you can use as a supplementary item. And basically it's listing all of the databases and the hits, the original hits that were captured, duplicates, and you can say this duplicates were removed by Covidence or manually, yada, yada. But specifically for each database we have, this is the database that we searched. This is the host. So the host information is actually really important because you can search CINAHL in EBSCOhost, and you can also search CINAHL in ProQuest database platform, and this will actually change up the look of the search. Data parameters, this is really specifically for what is our access to this database, not database filtering, or sorry, not time filtering in the search strategy itself. So this is basically for CINAHL, we have access to all literature from 1937 to the present. It doesn't mean that we've limited the search to only articles from 1937 to the present. And this is important in other databases like Web of Science or PsycInfo, or maybe you're doing a search that doesn't have a date restriction. Maybe another library institution has limits. Maybe they only have access from like 1960 or something. So if they did a search without a data, or with, sorry, I keep saying data, without a date filter, their results might be a little different. So that's why we note that. And then we'll just say, this is line by line. These are all of the searches that we did, so that a librarian can come in or a researcher can come in and redo everything that we did and get the same results. So we'll provide that when we do the searches. Let's see. Okay. So please don't skip those steps. Those are very important. So the next few slides, let's see, what time is it? Okay, we're almost at time, but basically this is just the steps of each phase that you'll go through that we mentioned earlier, from the literature searches, what needs to be involved with the title abstract screening, obtaining papers, the data extraction step. And I've already kind of mentioned a lot of this in other sessions as well. But you can always refer back to those, and we can always meet later if you wanted more of a conversation about those. So really quickly with our systematic review service, I have a link to our systematic review services page here. Let's see what else is after here. Okay, so we'll end with that, but let me just link in to our systematic review service. Thank you all for your patience. I usually will try and not. Usually I feel like the shorter webinars are preferable. So I'm sorry that this was so long. So if you go to our services column and go to systematic review services, we have our webpage for systematic review services, and it just shows our policies, what our expertise is, and how we can help you with your systematic review. If you do a systematic review, I now require that you have a memorandum of understanding signed. Because we have been so busy and we have so many requests coming through, we want to make sure that that once we do the search, which is one of the beginning steps, that the team actually goes forth and will screen what we have done. But it's also to give you guys a peace of mind of this is what we agree to do for your systematic review progress or project. And this is also what we expect from the researchers. So good communication, basically. And making sure that you send us a protocol, that you're providing clear inclusion, exclusion criteria for the project so that we can base our search on it, and that you give us enough time to complete the searches, because there's only a couple of us that do systematic reviews for the entire campus. Go back here. Frustrating, whatever it. Okay. If you have a search request, please place it through our expert search request here. And very quickly, we are not taking any more requests for let me actually share my video so you can see me. We are not taking on any new requests for the rest of the year because we are working through a lengthy wait list, and we have people on maternity leave, and I have one coming back in a week, and I'm so excited. Usually the librarians on my team, they're really busy. It's not their main part of their job to do systematic review searches for me. So there's maybe James will help. I do them, Emma O'Hagan, Lauren Wheeler. And some of our other librarians are doing more with literature searches specifically, or helping students with their scoping reviews. We will get to your request, but it's not going, if you placed anything in the last week or two, we're not going to be able to get to it until the spring semester. I'm sorry about that. I've never been this busy before. And I think it's because we promoted our service, and we'll never do that again. Just a little joke. But yeah, if I see emails coming through, and I will get to those, and I apologize if you are still waiting on a search from me. But we are going to be working through our wait list for now. But thank you for using our service and asking us and trusting us with your searches. We are trying to work through those as fast as we can. But we do have a systematic review service. We are not taking on any new reviews yet, but submit your requests still, but just be aware of that. That is all I have for today, but do you have any other questions for me? And I think, let me stop sharing. And I think I have some chats I didn't see. Oh yeah, definitely unlikely that you're going to find everything. No problem, Jonathan. Oh yeah, so James had just submitted that hedge, and okay. Yeah, so I think that was all the questions that I have. I'm going to stop the recording for now, but thank you for attending this webinar.